All right. Hello and welcome to the Benedict Challenge, a 40-day spiritual fast for Catholics or for anyone seeking a spiritual breakthrough by creating your own fasting rule. So you may have heard of OMAD, or 1 meal a day. It's a popular form of intermittent fasting, but I bet you didn't know that you can actually trace this back to the early Western monastic tradition, and specifically the rule of Saint Benedict. And sadly, this tradition has largely been forgotten, but many Catholics are rediscovering the bodily element of their faith. And whether you're taking this challenge during Lent or during any other 40-day period, I look at it as an opportunity to reconnect to an ancient tradition and also understand how fasting heals and transforms through the lens of modern science. So in 40 days, you can adapt to eating just 1 meal a day. That's the big promise. And you can then take that template, which has been given to us by spiritual masters like Saint Benedict, and you can modify it and make it into your own rule. So if fasting is so great, you might wonder, why has it fallen out of favor? And in short, because it's hard, especially in modern times when we've got so much abundance. We're constantly tempted by different foods and just the sheer abundance of our prosperous times. There was a man, however, Adalbert de Vogüé, who was kind of a sign of contradiction in modern times. He was a French Benedictine monk, and he found himself questioning this idea that had become pervasive, even within the monasteries, that it's no longer possible to fast like the saints used to, the saints of old, like Saint Benedict, his spiritual master. And he says in his book, To Love Fasting, that people said that man had changed. The weakness of people's health no longer allows us to fast. Was it true? Does that sound familiar? I mean, I think we do hear this often. And his answer was a resounding no. He went back and looked at the rule of Saint Benedict, which is the founding document for Western monasticism, and he finds a fasting rule within it that includes no more than 2 meals per day, and frequently just 1 meal on fasting days and throughout Lent, just 1 meal a day. And so he learns that it's not only possible by implementing it in his own life, he learns that after adjusting, it's actually a joy, and it becomes easier to fast than to not fast. Not fasting becomes this discomfort for Adalbert. So you might be thinking, just like Adalbert did at the start of his journey, it's one thing to fast, but it's another to actually enjoy fasting, to love fasting. And this is what Saint Benedict admonishes the monks of his time to do. He says that we should, sort of bring our body under our control, develop a discipline, but not only that, we should love fasting. And according to Adalbert, the only way to do this is to trust in the word of God, in the example of the saints, and in the great voice of tradition. And trusting in this witness, just try it. So here we are in sort of week 0. This is Thursday. We're coming up on Lent next Wednesday. And there's no particular time when you have to try this, but the period of Lent seems like a convenient time to do it. But before we actually start the fasting component, there's a whole foundation that we need to set. And that starts with a quick history of what the biblical understanding of fasting was, so that we can put spiritual fasting in its proper context. And it might seem obvious, but in the Bible, fasting is not presented as a weight loss hack. It was meant as a humbling experience and sort of a way to afflict your soul, afflict your body, and express sorrow when a disaster was drawing near or had already happened. Not this kind of modern view of fasting as just a pure life hack. And yet we can't really separate the spiritual component from the physical component. And once you embrace this bodily aspect of your faith, then you really need to look at fasting as something that addresses the whole person. And a spiritual goal might be a desire to be free from a particular vice or sin, might be reconciliation of a certain relationship, increase in gratitude, a more fervent prayer life, or it could be freedom from spiritual oppression and constant distraction, or a lack of discipline that leads you through the never-ending cycle of addiction. And with COVID-19 still causing all these problems and no end in sight, we might also look to fasting as a path to healing rather than the latest vaccine or modern medicine. Your body contains amazing self-healing properties, and these can really only be tapped through some degree of faith. Faith that you can go without food for a time. And one of the biggest misconceptions about fasting is that it's a starvation diet. Uh, Rather, it's really a lesson in relying temporarily on the super substantial bread, which comes down to us from heaven. And that's the word of God. So this word epiousios, a Greek word that sometimes is translated as daily, like in the Lord's Prayer, you have, give us this day our daily bread. The Greek epiousios, our epiousian bread, refers to this super substantial, life-giving, faith-sustaining word of God that ultimately allows us to experience fasting as a joy rather than a penance or a pure sacrifice. So the aim of this course is to revive the tradition of fasting. Another great quote from Adalbert de Vogüé is, desiring to purify fasting, we have killed it. So sort of restore it to proper proportion, and following the example, the testimony of the saints and of holy men like Adalbert de Vogüé, we can recall the passage from the Gospel of Matthew during Jesus's temptation in the wilderness, the 40 days that he spent preparing for his public ministry, where he replies to the devil who's been tempting him with bread. He says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." So in the course of these next 40 days, you'll be creating your own fasting rule according to spiritual goals, discernment, and also whatever physical goals or limitations you might have. Now, de Vogüé defended the practice of one meal a day for the sake of consistency and ultimately the ease of implementation. And I also think that one meal a day is a great template to which you can add rigor or flexibility, whatever you want. We'll be focusing on strategies to make this switch over. I call it kind of the crossing of the Jordan, as easy and as seamless as possible, because fasting is already hard enough as it is. We ultimately want to switch from thinking of it as a penance to thinking of it as a vital discipline that we can keep throughout our lives, and something which enhances our ability to experience joy and which prepares us for an encounter with God, or with the mystical, with the higher power, if you are not of a Catholic persuasion. And after providing this sort of simple baseline of the aging and metabolism processes, I'll be providing a template for transitioning to one meal a day, using the latest psychology on habits, having a really clear goal in mind, and using certain cues and rewards to hone in those habits. And then also some of the techniques that have helped me to manage hunger. And of course, the spiritual component, the epiousian bread, which sustains us during our more difficult times of fasting. And then lastly, I'm also putting together a catalog of simple, nutritious preparations, recipes that will provide the body with what it needs in between meals in order to thrive and be maximally healthy. So take the challenge. I hope you'll join me on this spiritual fasting journey, preparing yourself for an encounter with God or an impossible challenge, and ultimately healing yourself from within. You can learn more and sign up at anaturalmethod.com, and I hope to see you there.